This is episode 49 of Ethics and Culture Cast from the DeNicola Center for Ethics and Culture. Welcome to episode 49 of Ethics and Culture Cast from Notre Dame's DeNicola Center for Ethics and Culture. I'm Ken Hellenius, the communications specialist at the center. In this episode, we chat with Dan Philpott, a DCEC faculty fellow and professor in the political science department, and Jessica Keating, program director of the Notre Dame Office of Life and Human Dignity at the McGrath Institute for Church Life. They are the co-teachers of a class in the theology department entitled Why the Church?, which invites students to engage with the substantive questions that many consider to be stumbling blocks to remaining engaged with the Catholic faith. Let's sit down at a responsible social distance for this delightful conversation. Well, thank you so much for coming to be with us and tell us a little bit about this exciting course that you guys are working on. How long have you been here? What is your main area, Dan?
Yeah, I'm a political scientist, and so I work largely in the field of religion and politics, so I've been interested in these kinds of questions for a long time.
Sure.
But I very much came here to Notre Dame in 2001 out of an attraction for the Catholic University. And I try as much as I can to teach courses that stand at the intersection of the Catholic tradition and politics.
Sure.
And so I also had just a much more broader interest in bringing the faith to students and trying to help them to, work through a lot of the questions that they have. Notre Dame is typical of the millennial generation. They have the same kinds of questions. A lot of the same trends are present among Notre Dame students. And so it's out of this kind of larger vocation of trying to bring the faith to students that I was inspired to take up the cudgel.
Sure. Jess, what's your background?
So I am the director of the Office of Life and Human Dignity in the McGrath Institute for Church Life, and I'm also working on a PhD in systematic theology.
Okay.
And got a phone call from Dan at the end of last semester and a couple of folks in the theology department asking if I'd be, willing to step in after Peter went to Duke. And, really jumped at the chance to be able to help students understand what the faith teaches and why more clearly, and to offer sort of that witness of faith to them. I think a lot of our theology courses here at Notre Dame do have an apologetic edge to them. Our faculty in theology are committed to different religious traditions, but are committed to practicing faith, and to really do that in a way in this course that's very upfront about that apologetic aim.
Right.
Whether it's for students who are totally skeptical or sort of have questions, or students who are, all in and want to be able to explain our beliefs better to people. So we sort of designed the course to be able to reach that sort of scaffolded group of students from all across the spectrum.
Sure.
Well, the course began with a blog post that Bishop Robert Barron wrote back in 2016, where he noticed a report from the Pew Research Center showing that there are these terrible trends of millennials and young people leaving the Catholic Church. The statistics are showing that this is happening in large numbers. And the report also reported some of the reasons why they're leaving the church that they're reporting. And he lamented this because he said, the Catholic tradition has answers to these reasons. We've been talking about this for centuries,
right,
and they're there. And he said the problem is we're not communicating it. And he issued a cri de coeur for Catechists, Apologists, and Evangelists. That's what we need. So I read this and I thought, that's a neat idea for a course here at Notre Dame.
Yeah.
So I teamed up with Professor Peter Casarella in theology, who was here at the time, and we sat down and started drafting up ideas, and that became Why the Church.
Awesome. You mentioned this spectrum of students, both those who want to defend what they do believe, but then, of course, those who are maybe on their way out. Are there more of one than the other?
When I'm telling somebody about this course, they often ask, who's the target audience?
Sure.
Is this for the already convinced or is this for the not convinced? And how does that play here at Notre Dame? Well, the answer is both and more. It's really for a whole spectrum of students. That it could be for a student who's already of strongly committed faith. This could be a course that could help them to know how to deepen it and how to defend it and bring it into conversation. But it's also at the same time for the student who is questioning and not sure, maybe skeptical, or the student who is somewhere in between. And of course, not every student at Notre Dame is a Catholic either.
Right.
And so it may be for them learning about the Catholic tradition. So I think the course can work at all of those levels.
And I really wish I had had a course like this in college myself, because I had a lot of these same questions. I am technically a millennial, and had a lot of these same questions and objections to the church. And really, it unfolded over many years receiving those answers, but to have had a course where they were explicitly addressed, I think could have, maybe sped up the process a little bit, rather than sort of wandering for a long period of time. So I think that in that way, students sort of jump at the chance to actually do a close examination of the very reasons that they are thinking about potentially leaving, or the objections that they have, or the questions that they're struggling with. John Cavadini has this saying that people leave the church without regret because they don't actually know the treasures and the richness that they're leaving, because they haven't received the fullness of the church's tradition. And so often they leave with a false notion of what the church teaches. And so this course can help clear that away, that actually, no, the church doesn't teach that there's a conflict between science and religion.
Right.
And so to give students sort of a glimpse into sort of the richness of the tradition of the church, so that they don't leave without regretting something about leaving.
They can't say they didn't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's a wonderful kind of breaking off point then. What are the things you talk about? Because I know that there are kind of different modules in this. So how is the course structured?
So we organize the course around the things that this generation is telling us are alienating them. Now, we start the course first by just looking at some demographic data on millennials, showing that they are leaving the church and showing some of the reasons why, profiling their views. Then we have a brief bridge on what is apologetics, what is the church. But then we really get into the meat of the course, which is to look at these questions. So we have one on science and God, where we look at the rationality of God and evolution and the challenge of the new atheist. Then we have one on sex and marriage. Then we have one on history, looking at the idea that the church has been sort of the bad guy in history, the Galileo, the Inquisition, and that the church is always sort of playing catch up to the secular world, which has kind of pioneered progress. Then we look at politics. I think a lot of students think that the church is just straightforwardly conservative. We try to show that it's a deeper source than that it cuts across political boundaries. Then we have a pivot towards a more positive apologetics, whereas we look at the arguments from beauty, we look at the saints and what they tell us, then we close with the arguments for the resurrection. So kind of a good place to end. What's important to keep in mind is that throughout the course we engage what we call the disputatio method, which is that we begin with a skepticism. Why are people skeptical of the church's teachings in this generation? And then we seek to look at what does the church have to say about that issue? How does the church address that? What is the church's answer? Now, we don't pretend to neutrality. We don't just have a kind of, we're just going to give all views. Yeah. But we do want to bring about a genuine debate and a genuine space for the students to ask their toughest, most difficult, most challenging questions. But ultimately, it's to see what the church has to say.
So I looked over the syllabus and I noticed a number of readings, and I also noticed that it's not just you two who are teaching. Here we are at a university, so it seems that you should draw upon all of the resources of the university and some people beyond our borders as well. So who are some of the people that you bring in to talk about these things?
Yeah, so we have some great guest speakers. We were able to bring in Professor Brad Gregory to speak on the question of new atheism and the supposed conflict between science and religion. Helen Alvarez just zoomed in today to give a lecture on Catholic feminism and offered such a compelling witness that both, acknowledges some of the shortcomings in the church in practicing what it has already worked out theologically, but to offer a vision of true feminism, what it means to be truly a liberated and empowered woman. And she's so compelling because she is so successful and has a family and is brilliant, and is really able to articulate for the students what that vision of a full and free womanhood can look like. We had Raquel Story speak on Eden Invitation, which is a new-ish ministry in the church for same-sex attracted Catholics. Who else, Dan?
I think Christian Smith is worth mentioning.
Oh, yeah.
Now, he's one of the he's a sociologist here at Notre Dame, but one of the world's leading experts on the religious attitudes of young people and of Catholics in particular. So he's known for coining the great term moralistic therapeutic deism.
Right.
And if you can kind of wrap your tongue and your mind around that, it's a term that has gained very large traction and is a term that is used to kind of understand the attitudes of millennials, often voiced by church leaders and people in the public debates. So he was here to help us sort through some of the data and the trends, and it was a perfect person to do it.
Sure.
We also had Chris Baglow speak. He runs the Science and Religion Initiative in the McGrath Institute, and able to speak to the beauty and order of God in creation, as well as the paradox and mystery of God. And we're so fortunate at Notre Dame to have the planetarium. Our students make a trip to the planetarium to see the presentation, All Creation Gives Praise, which is like you start on Earth and you zoom out to the whole cosmos. It's a combination of science and scripture as it's narrated. And I think they find that both maybe a little bit overwhelming to see how vast the universe is, but also how special and unique we are in that we are objects of God's love and tenderness in this vast, infinite universe. So that's really neat to be able to do that, and only possible really at a university, a Catholic university like Notre Dame.
Yeah. I'm reminded, I want to go back to this idea. Dan, you're not a trained theologian.
No, I'm not. I'm just interested.
Yeah, but a believer. I mean,
Yes.
So maybe this is kind of your entry point, and your passion for this comes from your own background.
Yes, I came to the church myself as an adult in Easter 1998. And perhaps it's just my temperament or my mindset, but I had spent about 6 years investigating the church, and
Sure.
maybe it's that I'm an academic and I like to argue, and I had to sort of squeeze out every ounce of objection.
Sure.
And so to me, the arguments are important, and the reasons that we give, Peter talks about giving a reason for the hope that is within you. Mm-hmm. And some people will say that, arguments are really not for the millennial generation. They're just about experience and story and so forth. And we do have a lot of that in the course, but I still think that arguments are important, and the disputatio is important. And so it's something that I've been reading and thinking about for a long time. I guess I'm not a trained theologian, but I'm kind of a theologian wannabe. And I do read in theology and read, my work intersects in theology between politics and theology. And so just been very, these are the kind of books that I pick up in my spare time. And
Right.
That's kind of a good indicator of what you're really interested in.
Yeah.
But when I can reach for a book and when I have time to read something I want, it's in theology.
Sure. Jess, what has been to you now, looking at the syllabus, what are some of the readings that are most intriguing to the students? What are some of the readings perhaps that are most intriguing to you?
That's a great question. So I think the students in what we've taught so far have found the science and religion section quite compelling. The marriage section, I think, quite challenging. Mm-hmm. But they, from what I can gather, enjoyed reading The New Atheist and the responses to The New Atheist. And most of them seem to really be on board with saying, of course, there are different ways of knowing, that science doesn't exhaust our ways of knowing, and seem to really be open to that idea and to the religious perspective in sort of the supposed conflict between science and religion. So I would say that those readings of Dennett, of Professor Gregory, were all really well received and intrigued the students quite a bit.
Sure. Now, are there things that were part of your vision for the course before you started teaching that have changed in response to what you're hearing in the classroom?
Well, we put certain readings on that we then had to in response to the course evaluations, have decided to take out. And
sure.
I think sometimes we had assigned readings that were perhaps too academic, or that might have been intriguing to us as kind of academically oriented theologians. And we've tried to keep a very strong intellectual content, but we want it to be arguments and pieces that really can be accessible to the student who has never thought about these things before.
Yeah.
And I think that's very important. And so they're, I think they have a lot of theological depth and intellectual depth, but they're also written in a way that, can appeal directly to students in what they're thinking and where they are. And we try to get some nice debates and disputes going among
sure.
the readings as well.
I noticed that you had some Thomas Aquinas in there, and I'll tell you, as somebody who read Thomas, the tiniest bit in college and then in my master's course, he was entirely incomprehensible to me for the longest time. But when you mentioned using the disputatio method, putting the best objections first and then say, okay, well, here's the objections, here's what we really teach, now let's respond to the objections. I mean, that model, even the model of thinking as the church has thought about these things, I think is an important introduction for students.
Yeah, and I think that has been a really neat part of the course. The students actually write disputatio papers as one of their central assignment. They have to choose a contested topic and write it in the disputatio method. So the overall structure of the course and then the assignments complement each other really, really well. And I think what the disputatio method does is it teaches you how to argue charitably and to actually take the objections of the side you disagree with seriously and to put those best objections forward and to actually listen to them. And so in having students actually practice writing in that method, where I think one of the hopes of the course is that they are able to learn to engage with opinions or views that they may not agree with in robustly intellectual ways and also in charitable ways.
Yeah.
We actually have the papers modeled upon Thomas Aquinas's way of construing a question. Mm-hmm. So they have to decide what the question is, and they can choose the topic, whether it's racism or the environment or proofs for God or sexuality and marriage. We get everything. And so they set the question, and then they start off with the objections and then their view and then the replies that correspond to the objections. And so they have to structure the paper in that way.
What are some things perhaps that are emerging issues for millennials maybe that would need to be added to the course going forward?
Well, I think the area of sexuality and marriage is always fast moving. What was an issue yesterday is kind of somewhat forgotten, maybe still controversial, but now there are new frontiers. So now, for instance, like the transgender issue is very much, being hotly disputed. And we're very much committed in the course to discussing head on and to confronting head on and talking about the things that are most on the student's mind. And so we were sure to include that. And we found some recent material, recent discussions of it to present it. And the sex abuse crisis in the church also has been a huge source of alienation and something that's causing people to leave and to exit. And so there again, we thought that's something we have to address.
Yeah, and even this year, in light of everything that unfolded this summer with police brutality and and the murders of African Americans, we felt like we needed to find a way to incorporate that into the course, especially in the history and politics section. So we're actually using the CEC's panel that you all did earlier this summer on racism as a pro-life issue. Mm-hmm. So really drawing in that contemporary concern that's in the press and in the culture and warrants discussion into the wider framework of the course.
Wow. It's not all gloomy, though. There's also beauty and the saints and the resurrection, and we very much want to communicate the beauty and the joy and the attractiveness.
Okay, so you made reference to this earlier. Jess, you even said it, you wish you had this course when you were in college. I'm well out of college. I want to take this course. What are some things perhaps that an interested person could read that would begin to scratch a bit of this? Or what are some resources that are available to people who can't come sit in a class at Notre Dame?
I think starting with some of Robert Barron's videos is never a bad place to start. He offers these short, 8-minute clips addressing some of these very questions. So I think that's one place. I also think that there are a number of good resources out there, especially on sexuality and marriage. Bill Madison's written a great deal on that. Eden Invitation is a new and emerging ministry to look at the church's outreach to people of same-sex attraction. So those would be like on marriage. Maybe that's because we just finished our marriage unit that I'm thinking of places to sort of start if there's an interest there. I don't know what you'd recommend, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, the new atheists are, I think, still much on people's minds, and polls show that some 70% of millennial Catholics think that there's a basic tension between faith and science. And so somebody could pick up those readings, and really that could be a great entree as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I got to say, this is a wonderful course. The last question that I have is how has the center helped in this process, or kind of helped nourish the work of the class?
Well, the center's been instrumental in providing financial support for the TAs that are an essential part of the course. So we have 2 lecture days, and then there's a discussion section every week, and we need multiple TAs to be able to run those discussion sections well, so that they're small enough so that students can actually engage in conversation with one another. And that requires more support than is available for a typical course of this size. And the center has generously provided the extra funds that we need to have the additional TAs that really make the course what it is and allow us to have those small group discussion sections for students.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for bringing this course to the students, and I can only see this sort of important work expanding and being available to even more students, and who knows, beyond the walls too.
Well, we're delighted to have the center really as a partner, and not just as a sort of source of funding or what have you. That has been critical for us to have those small sections. But from the beginning, I shared the idea with Director Carter Sneed, and he instantly saw that as something he wanted to enter into a partnership with and help get behind. And he himself also lectures, is one of our guest lecturers. So he'll talk about life issues and bioethics and the conception of the person behind these issues, and in a way that went over really well when he did that before. And so it's really is a growing partnership that awesome. We're grateful for.
Well, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Ken.
Thank you to Jess and Dan. You'll find links to several of the videos and readings that they mentioned in the show notes. Subscribe to Ethics and Culture Cast so that you can always get the latest episodes by visiting ethicscenter.nd.edu/podcast. We would love your feedback. Please review the show on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts, and email your suggestions to cecpodcast@nd.edu. Our theme music is I Don't Know by Grapes, licensed under the Creative Commons Attribution License. We'll see you next time on Ethics and Culture Cast. Until then, make good decisions.